I never thought a single meal could alter the course of my life. At that time, I was just another struggling man, invisible in a world that didn't care if I lived or starved. But on that day, fate tested me, and destiny disguised itself in the fragile figure of a hungry old woman. The day began, like most of my days did back then, with emptiness in my stomach and a weight on my shoulders that felt impossible to shake off. The streets were loud, filled with impatient footsteps and honking horns, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on the few coins clutched in my hand, turning them over and over, as though by some miracle they might multiply. They didn't. I had exactly enough for one plate of food at the small cafe down the street. Just enough to silence the growls in my stomach and buy myself the strength to keep going. It wasn't luxury, but to me, it felt like survival. I walked toward the cafe, head down, already deciding what I'd order. But just as I reached the corner, I saw her. She sat slumped against the cafe wall, her knees pulled to her chest. Her clothes were worn and dirty, patched together from scraps of fabric. Her hair was a tangled mess of gray, and her frail hands shook as they rested in her lap. Her skin clung to her bones, pale and tired, like someone who had been fighting hunger far longer than I had. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved faintly. I couldn't hear her words. Was she praying? Or was she whispering to herself, trying to hold on? I stopped in my tracks. A storm began inside me. My hunger was sharp, tearing at me from the inside. Those coins in my hand were the only thing standing between me and another sleepless night. If I gave them up, I'd have nothing left. "Walk away," a voice in my head urged. "You can't afford this. You've suffered enough yourself." But another voice, quieter but heavier, whispered back, "You know this pain. You know the hollow ache of going without. Are you really going to ignore her?" I stared at her for what felt like forever. Each second felt like a battle. My throat tightened. My palms grew sweaty around the coins. Finally, before I could think any further, my feet carried me toward her. Her eyes flickered open when my shadow fell over her. They were dull and tired, yet in them I saw a faint spark, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might notice her. I bent slightly. "Are you hungry?" I asked softly. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Still, the answer was written all over her face. I pointed toward the cafe door. "Come with me. Let's get you something to eat." For a moment, she shook her head, embarrassed, clutching her stomach as though she could hide her need. Pride was battling with her hunger. I understood it. I had felt the same way before. But I didn't move away. I extended my hand, slow and steady. She hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, placed her hand in mine. Together, we walked into the cafe. The room quieted when we entered. People turned, their conversations faltering. I felt their eyes on us, sharp and judgmental. Some looked at her with pity, others at me with curiosity, as if wondering why a man who clearly had little himself was bringing in someone who had even less. We found a table in the corner. The waiter approached reluctantly, his nose wrinkling, his tone clipped. "What will you have?" I emptied my coins onto the table, my heart sinking at how little it looked. "A plate of rice, curry, and bread," I said. It was everything I had. The waiter glanced at me, then at her, then back at me. His expression held silent questions, but he said nothing. He scribbled down the order and walked away. We sat in silence. She kept her eyes down, as though ashamed to even be sitting there. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the weight between us, but the words wouldn't come. When the food arrived, I pushed the plate toward her. She stared at it for a moment, her lips trembling, before finally lifting the spoon. Her hands shook as she took the first bite. Tears welled in her eyes and slid down her cheeks as she ate, each mouthful hurried, desperate, yet filled with gratitude. She tried to muffle her sobs, but I heard them. I sat across from her, my own hunger gnawing at me, but I couldn't look away. The sight of her eating, the relief washing over her face, filled something inside me that food never could. My chest tightened, and before I knew it, my own eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. For a long time we said nothing. Just the sound of her spoon against the plate, the cafe murmurs around us, and the quiet beating of my heart in my ears. She slowed as she reached the last bites, her breathing heavy, but steady. Finally, she set the spoon down and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her eyes lifted to mine, no longer hollow, but shining with life. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was light, trembling, but filled with warmth. I froze, startled, but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracked with emotion. "You don't know what you've done for me today." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, but deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. For her, it was everything. We sat there, hand in hand, for what felt like a moment outside of time. Then, slowly, she stood. Her body was still frail, but her steps were steadier now. She turned to leave, but paused beside me. She leaned closer, her breath faint, but her words sharp enough to carve themselves into my memory. "We will meet again, and it will not be like this." I blinked, stunned. What did she mean? I wanted to ask, but she had already turned away. I watched her walk out of the cafe, her small frame swallowed by the crowd outside. Within seconds, she was gone, as though she had never been there at all. But her words lingered. They echoed in my mind, circling again and again. "We will meet again, and it will not be like this." As I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I had no idea who she truly was, or why her words carried such strange weight. But something deep inside whispered that my life had just shifted. I didn't know it then, but that simple lunch was only the beginning of a destiny far greater and far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. People only see your actions, never the weight you carry inside. They see the smile you force, but not the nights you lie awake wondering how much longer you can survive. Behind every choice I made, there was a shadow of hunger, fear, and dreams that seemed too far to reach. When people looked at me, they saw an ordinary man. They didn't see the exhaustion hidden behind my eyes or the calluses on my hands from endless labor. They didn't see how every morning I dragged myself out of bed, not because I had hope, but because I had no choice. I worked long hours at a job that felt more like a cage than employment. The factory floor was filled with noise, machines grinding, belts moving, men shouting orders. The air was heavy with dust and sweat. My clothes always smelled of oil and iron, and no matter how much I scrubbed, the stains seemed permanent, just like the cycle I was trapped in. Every shift felt longer than the last. My body ached constantly, but the pay was barely enough to cover rent and the most basic food. I would stare at my paycheck, running my fingers over the numbers, and wonder how a man could give so much of his life only to receive so little in return. Debts clung to me like chains. There were always bills I couldn't pay, promises I couldn't keep. Each month I fell further behind, sinking into a hole that grew deeper no matter how hard I tried to climb out. And then there were my family responsibilities. My younger sister depended on me after our parents passed away. She was bright, full of dreams, but dreams needed money. I worked not just for myself, but for her, to put food on the table, to keep the roof over our heads. The weight of her future pressed against my shoulders every day. At times, I looked at others my age, men who had careers, cars, homes, families. They moved forward while I stayed stuck, running in place on a treadmill I couldn't escape. Social gatherings were the worst. I avoided them because I couldn't bear the pity in their eyes, or worse, the judgment. That day at the cafe, when I gave my last coins to feed the old woman, It cost me more than anyone realized. I skipped my own meal. I walked home with my stomach twisting in hunger, every step heavier than the last. I remember sitting on my bed that night staring at the ceiling. My body ached, my head pounded, and my stomach growled angrily. I pressed my hand against it, trying to quiet the pain, but my heart wouldn't stop replaying. The image of her. The way her tears fell as she ate. The way her voice trembled when she thanked me. Had I been foolish? Or had I been blessed? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the emptiness in my belly was nothing compared to the strange fullness in my chest. Something had shifted, though I couldn't explain it. Days turned into weeks. Life fell back into its rhythm. Work, exhaustion, unpaid bills, restless nights. Slowly, the memory of that afternoon began to fade into the background, like a dream you try to hold on to but can't. And just when I thought I had almost forgotten her, she returned. It was an ordinary day, no different from the others. I was dragging myself home after another long shift when I saw a figure standing across the street. At first, I thought my tired mind was playing tricks on me, but then she turned, and my heart nearly stopped. It was her, the same old woman from the cafe. Only this time, she didn't look the same at all. She didn't look like the same woman I had fed that day. The frail, broken stranger who once trembled over a plate of rice had vanished. In her place stood a woman transformed, her clothes clean, her eyes sparkling with secrets, her smile carrying the weight of something I couldn't yet understand. I remember the exact moment it happened, because it felt like the air itself shifted. I was dragging my tired body home after another long shift at the factory. The streets were crowded with people heading back from work, laughter echoing from a tea stall nearby, the usual chaos of the evening pressing down on me. I had my head lowered, lost in thoughts of rent, bills, and the endless cycle of exhaustion. And then I saw her. Across the street, under the golden glow of a street lamp, stood a woman. At first, I barely glanced at her. She looked so out of place in this part of town, too neat, too confident. But when my eyes returned to her face, my heart skipped a beat. It was her. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It couldn't be, I thought. The woman I remembered was frail, hunched, her eyes dull from hunger. She had looked like a ghost drifting through the world, unseen and forgotten. But this woman, she stood tall, her shoulders straight, her presence commanding. Her clothes were simple but neat, her hair combed back, her skin glowing with a radiance that made her seem almost younger. And her eyes, they were the most striking. Once hollow, they now sparkled like they carried entire galaxies of secrets. I rubbed my eyes, half convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But when she turned, her gaze locking onto mine, I knew I wasn't mistaken. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. My feet felt rooted to the ground as she began walking toward me, each step slow and deliberate. My chest tightened with every movement, my thoughts spiraling. How? How could she look so different? What had happened in just a few short weeks? When she finally stopped in front of me, I could barely find my voice. "It's you," I whispered. "Yes," she said, her voice calm, steady, as though we were simply continuing a conversation we'd left unfinished. "You look different." The words stumbled out clumsily. She chuckled softly, her smile widening. "I imagine I do." For a moment I just stared, unsure if I should feel relief, confusion, or fear. Then she said the words that shook me even more. "I've been looking for you." I blinked. "Looking for me?" She nodded. "Yes. I owed you more than just a thank you. And I don't leave debts unpaid." Her voice carried a kind of certainty that made my skin prickle. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the way she looked at me, steady, piercing, kept me silent. "Can we sit?" she asked gently, gesturing toward a nearby bench under the street lamp. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, to escape the strange sense of destiny that seemed to follow her. But another part, stronger, was drawn in. I nodded, and we walked to the bench together. The city moved around us, buses rumbling by, children laughing in the distance. But in that moment, it felt like we were in a bubble of stillness. She turned to me, her gaze sharp yet kind. "I want to know about you," she said. "Me?" I frowned. "Yes, your life, your struggles, who you are when no one else is watching." Her words dug deep. Hardly anyone in my life had ever cared to ask me that. People saw me as another worker, another face in the crowd. Nobody wanted to know about the nights I stayed awake counting debts, or the silent battles I fought alone. I shifted uncomfortably. "Why do you want to know?" "Because," she said softly, "you gave when you had nothing. And people like that, they matter." Her eyes didn't waver. Against my better judgment, I started talking. I told her about the factory, the endless hours, the noise, the exhaustion. I told her about my sister, about how I tried to support her dreams while burying my own. I spoke of the debts that kept piling higher, the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever escape. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. But I could see something flickering in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps even sorrow. It was as if my words were unearthing memories she had buried long ago. When I finished, silence stretched between us. My chest felt lighter, but my mind buzzed with unease. Why had I told her all that? Why did she want to know? Finally, she leaned closer, her voice almost a whisper. "You remind me of someone I once knew. Someone who changed my life when I had nothing." "Who?" I asked cautiously. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the small bag resting by her side. My pulse quickened as she pulled out a plain white envelope. She held it out to me with both hands, her expression serious. "Take this." I stared at it, my fingers twitching nervously. "What is it?" "Something for you," she said simply. "Open it when you're ready." Not before I hesitated, my hand hovering in the air. Everything about this moment felt surreal. Why was she giving me an envelope? What could possibly be inside? Finally, I took it. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried the weight of secrets I wasn't meant to know yet. Her smile returned, calm but mysterious. "You don't need to understand now," she said. "You will in time." I stared at the envelope in my hands, my heart pounding louder with every second. Questions swirled in my head. Who was she, really? And why was I suddenly a part of her story? Her eyes glistened, as though she already knew the storm she had just unleashed in my life. "Open it when you're ready," she whispered again, and I realized my world was about to change forever. My heart pounded as I tore it open with trembling hands, every sound around me fading into silence, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. The street, the noise, the passing world disappeared until there was nothing left but me, that plain white envelope, and the woman who had placed it so calmly into my grip. I had never felt so terrified of paper in my life, and yet I couldn't stop myself from opening it. The edges of the envelope scraped lightly against my fingers as I slid it open, and even that small sound felt deafening in the quiet between us, because my entire body was alive with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation, as though I was peeling away the layers of fate itself. When I pulled the contents free, my eyes first caught on a letter, folded neatly, the handwriting delicate and careful, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had lived through years of discipline and patience. My throat went dry as I unfolded it and began to read. "To the man who gave when he had nothing," it began, and even those first words made my chest tighten, because they cut right into the memory of that day at the cafe, reminding me that I had spent the last of my coins on a stranger when I had been starving myself. You will never know how much that meant to me. You will never know how rare it is to find someone who gives from a place of emptiness, who chooses kindness even when they are drowning. You did not just feed me. You reminded me of humanity I had long forgotten. For that, I owe you more than words, more than thanks. My eyes blurred as I read, and I swallowed hard, trying to steady my hands. But then something else slipped out from between the folds of the paper. A check. For a second, I didn't even recognize what I was holding. I blinked at it, then looked again, my breath catching in my throat. The numbers hit me like a thunderbolt. Zero after zero after zero stared back at me, taunting me, overwhelming me, whispering promises I didn't dare believe. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, everything I had told myself I would never have. My body shook violently, and I nearly dropped it as my mind reeled. This can't be real, I muttered aloud, my voice hoarse, almost broken. She sat across from me, her expression calm, unshaken, as though she had seen this reaction before, as though my shock was exactly what she had expected. "It's real," she said softly, her tone carrying a strange power that silenced my doubts, even as fear began to claw at my insides. I shook my head, thrusting the check back toward her, my voice trembling. No, this has to be some kind of mistake. You can't just hand someone." She leaned forward, her gaze steady and unwavering. "It's not a mistake." Then why?" My words cracked under the weight of confusion. "You don't even know me. Why would you give this to me?" Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "It's not charity," she said, each word firm and deliberate, cutting through me like a blade. "It's destiny." The word echoed in my head like a drumbeat. Destiny. I stared at the check again, my stomach twisting painfully. My instincts screamed warnings. Nobody gives this much for free. Nothing in life comes without a price. This is dangerous. This is a trap. But then another thought, softer, fragile but persistent, whispered in the back of my mind. What if this is real? What if this is the one chance you've been waiting for? The battle inside me was unbearable. My heart craved the possibilities this check represented. With it, I could wipe away the crushing weight of debt that had chained me for years. I could finally breathe without fear of bills piling up. I could send my sister to school without worry, give her the life she deserved. For once in my life, I could look beyond mere survival. And yet the fear was just as strong. Because if this was a trap, I would be dragged into something far worse than poverty. I gripped the check tightly, as though it might vanish if I loosened my hold. My mind raced through every possible explanation, every reason this could be happening, every story I had ever heard of scams and cruel tricks. Finally, I looked up at her, my voice breaking under the weight of desperation. "Why me? Why are you doing this?" Her eyes softened, glistening with something I couldn't name. "Because I see something in you," she whispered. "Something the world overlooks, something even you don't see in yourself yet. I see the man you are meant to become." Her calmness only unsettled me further. She spoke not like a stranger, but like someone who had been watching my life unfold, like someone who knew the path I was walking before I even stepped on it. I wanted to throw the check back at her, to walk away from this terrifying gift. But I couldn't. My fingers clung to it as though it were already a part of me, as though fate itself wouldn't allow me to let go. We sat in silence, the envelope lying open between us like a wound or a doorway. Every second stretched endlessly as I searched her face for any sign of deceit, any flicker of malice. But all I saw was conviction, a calm certainty that made me feel like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. "I don't know if I can accept this," I whispered finally, my voice hoarse. She leaned closer, her eyes blazing with intensity. "You don't have to decide now," she said gently. "But remember this. That meal you gave me was not the end of something. It was the beginning. You planted a seed that day, and seeds always grow." Her words wrapped around me like a prophecy, both terrifying and comforting. I looked at the check again, my hands trembling. The numbers glared at me, demanding a choice. My mind spun with possibilities and dangers, with hope and fear. I thought of my sister. I thought of my debts. I thought of the old woman I had once seen starving, and the stranger she had become now. And in that moment, I realized my life had already begun to change. Whether I accepted it or not, I had stepped onto a path I could no longer walk away from. She reached across the table, her hand steady as it closed over mine, silencing the storm inside me with nothing more than her touch. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, her voice carrying both warmth and certainty. Her eyes locked onto mine, her smile deepening with quiet power. "This," she said, with finality that left no room for doubt, "is only the beginning." I had to know why she had chosen me of all people, of all the faces in this vast city, of all the strangers who had passed her by. She had come back to find me, and she was determined to place her secrets and her fortune in my hands. The question burned inside me until I couldn't hold it back any longer, and when I asked, her answer changed everything. She sat across from me, the faint glow of the cafe light softening her features, and I finally leaned forward, unable to silence the storm inside my chest any longer. "Why me?" I asked, my voice rough, my throat tight. "You could have chosen anyone. Why me?" Her eyes softened, and for the first time since she had returned into my life, her expression seemed almost fragile, as though the memories she carried weighed heavier than anything money could buy. She drew in a slow breath and let it out, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup before she finally spoke. "Because once," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I was you." I frowned, not understanding, but she didn't stop. Her gaze drifted past me, into the distance, as if she were staring not at the cafe wall but into another time, another life. "There was a time when I was homeless," she said, her words deliberate and heavy. "Forgotten. Starving. I was a shadow in the streets, invisible to everyone who passed by. People looked at me like I was dirt, something to be stepped over, not someone worth saving." Her voice cracked, and I could feel the rawness in her words. I pictured her hunched on some forgotten street corner, weak and trembling the way I had first seen her, but worse, younger, abandoned, utterly alone. I remember nights when I lay on the cold pavement, staring at the stars and wondering if they even noticed me, she continued. My body ached with hunger, my bones cold from the ground beneath me. I prayed for morning because the darkness felt too endless, too cruel. Her eyes glistened with tears as she paused, her hands curling into fists in her lap. People walked past me every day. Some glanced, most didn't, and every time they ignored me, I felt myself disappearing more, as though I was less human, less alive. Her words carved into me, because I knew too well what it meant to be invisible, to be struggling while the world moved on without you. My chest tightened as she went on. And then, one day, a stranger stopped. Her face softened, her tears spilling freely now. He saw me. He didn't look at me with pity or disgust. He looked at me like I was human. He handed me food, not much, but it was everything in that moment. He smiled at me. Do you know what that meant? That smile. It told me I wasn't gone, that I still mattered. She covered her mouth with her trembling hand, her shoulders shaking with emotion. For a moment I sat frozen, unable to move, my throat thick with the weight of her confession. That man never knew what became of me, she said after a pause, her voice quieter now, steadier. But that single act of kindness, it saved me. Not just my body, but my spirit. It gave me the will to try again, to claw my way back into life. Her eyes lit with a fire as she continued. I worked. Harder than I thought I could. I scrubbed floors. I washed dishes. I carried loads heavier than my body could bear. I suffered. I bled. I endured. And step by step, brick by brick, I built myself up from the ashes. I built my empire from nothing, fueled by the memory of a stranger's kindness. Every coin I earned felt like proof that I wasn't forgotten, that I was stronger than the life that tried to bury me. I listened in stunned silence, my heart pounding. And when I saw you that day, standing outside that cafe with nothing in your pockets, I saw myself. I saw the hunger in your eyes, the weariness in your shoulders, the quiet despair in your face. And yet, you still gave. You still chose kindness. That is why I chose you. Because in you I saw the person I once was, and the person I became. Her tears flowed freely now, but her voice carried the strength of someone who had lived through storms and survived. Do you see? Life is not random. Kindness travels. It crosses time. It multiplies. What you gave me that day was not just food. It was a mirror. It was a seed. And now it has returned to you. Her words shook me to my core. My mind flashed back to the moment at the cafe, the trembling of her hands as she ate, the whisper she had left me with. We will meet again, and it will not be like this. Now I understood. I swallowed hard, my own eyes burning. I didn't do it expecting anything back, I whispered. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers, her touch warm despite her trembling. I know, she said softly. That's why it matters. We sat there in silence, the weight of her story pressing down on me like the air before a storm. And then she leaned closer, her gaze piercing mine, her lips trembling with words that sent shivers racing down my spine. Your story, she whispered, is about to mirror mine. Her words struck me harder than thunder, filling me with fear and anticipation all at once. What did she mean? That my life would follow the same path as hers? That I too would walk the road of hunger, betrayal, and triumph? Or was she telling me that destiny had already chosen me, long before I even knew it? As her eyes locked onto mine, I realized there was no escaping the truth. My journey had only just begun. I never knew wealth could carry such heavy secrets. To me, fortune had always been a dream, a shining escape from hunger and debts. But as she began to unravel her past, I realized that behind every coin she owned lay scars, betrayals, and choices that could break even the strongest of souls. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady but distant, as though she were sifting through years of memories before choosing which ones to share. The envelope and the check still lay between us, but now her story demanded my full attention. You wonder where it all came from, she began softly, her eyes glimmering under the cafe light. You wonder how a woman who once begged for scraps could sit before you with wealth beyond measure. I will tell you. But you must understand, fortune is not a gift. It is a battlefield. Her words sank into me with a gravity I hadn't expected. I had nothing when I started, she said. But life offered me small chances, slivers of opportunity most people would have overlooked. A job cleaning floors in a shop, a chance to carry goods for a market stall, a man who paid me a few coins to wash clothes. They were scraps, but I grabbed onto them with both hands. I worked harder than anyone else. I listened. I learned. And slowly, I began to see patterns where others saw chaos. A chance to buy low, to sell high, a chance to invest a little time for greater reward. That is how it begins, with scraps that you refuse to waste. Her voice hardened as she went on. But fortune has a price. And that price is betrayal. Her eyes clouded, her hand tightening against the table. People I trusted stole from me. Partners I built with turned against me. I was cheated, lied to, broken more times than I can count. And each time, I thought it was the end. Each time, I thought I couldn't go on. But I learned. Betrayal is the tax of ambition. You either pay it and rise stronger, or you give up and let it bury you." Her words cut deep, painting pictures of sleepless nights, of battles fought not with fists, but with patience, strategy, and sacrifice. "I gave up years of my life," she continued. "I slept little. I ate less. I lost friendships. I lost love. There were days when my body cried out for rest, but I kept going, because I had promised myself I would never go back to the pavement, never again be invisible. Every sacrifice became a brick, and brick by brick, I built an empire no one could ignore." She fell silent for a moment, her breath trembling as though the weight of those memories still pressed against her chest. Then she looked at me, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "Do you know why I tell you this? Because fortune reveals the truth of people. When you have nothing, the world ignores you. But when you have something, they will come, with smiles, with promises, with hands outstretched. And most of them will mean you harm. That is why I trust only a few. That is why I share with even fewer. Because wealth is not protection. Wealth is a target." Her words made my skin crawl. I had always thought of money as salvation, the answer to every problem I faced. But now, hearing her, I realized it was not only power, it was also a curse. She leaned forward, her voice softer now, almost tender. "Wealth without purpose is poison. It rots you from within. I learned that the hard way. For years I chased it for the wrong reasons: pride, revenge, fear. And though I built my empire, I felt emptier than ever. It was only when I began to use it to lift others, to repay the kindness once given to me, that I understood its true purpose." Her gaze locked onto mine, burning with conviction. "That is why I chose you. Not by chance, by fate. You gave without having anything. That makes you worthy. You remind me that fortune must return to kindness, or it becomes a curse." Her words shook me. Fate, worthy, chosen. These were not words I had ever associated with myself. I was just a man drowning in debts, carrying responsibilities I could barely manage. And now she was telling me I had been chosen, by destiny itself. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Could I really live up to her faith in me? Could I carry what she had carried, endure what she had endured? The doubt clawed at me like shadows in the dark. I shook my head slightly, my voice breaking. I'm not like you. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Her eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. Neither did I, when I started. Strength is not something you know you have. It is something you discover when you have no other choice. For a long moment, silence filled the space between us, heavy and unbroken. I stared at the table, at the letter, at the check, at the evidence of a destiny I had not asked for. My doubts swirled, my fears pressed against me. And then, she reached into her bag once more. I lifted my eyes, my breath catching as she pulled out a leather-bound folder, thick and worn from use. She placed it on the table between us, her hands steady, her eyes unblinking. "This," she said quietly, "is where it begins." She slid the folder across the table, its weight landing with a soft thud that seemed to echo louder than thunder in my ears. My fingers twitched as I stared at it, knowing that whatever lay inside would bind me to her forever. Her eyes never left mine, steady, unwavering, certain. And as the folder sat before me, I realized my life was about to change in ways I could never take back. "I want you to carry forward what I started." Her voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that made my heart pound, as if she had placed the world itself in my hands. I stared at her, stunned, as she unfolded a vision so vast and terrifying that it made my debts and daily struggles seem like grains of sand in comparison. She pushed the leather-bound folder closer to me, the same one she had slid across the table earlier, and I hesitated before opening it, my trembling fingers brushing against the smooth cover. My eyes flickered up to her face, and she gave me the smallest nod, urging me silently to look. Inside were documents, contracts, and detailed plans, pages filled with numbers, business ventures, outlines of investments that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Charts, maps, and signatures sprawled across the sheets, and the language itself felt foreign, as though I had stepped into a universe I had no place in. What is all this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Her eyes glimmered with quiet certainty. "It is my legacy, and I want you to carry it forward." My heart lurched violently in my chest. "Me?" I croaked. "You want me to do this?" "Yes," she said simply, her tone firm but kind. "You." She leaned closer, her words deliberate and heavy. "I built an empire, but an empire means nothing if it dies with me. I need someone to protect it, to grow it, to use it with purpose. And when I look at you, I see the same fire I once carried, the strength to endure, the humility to give, and the courage to lead." Her proposal was staggering. Investments worth fortunes, mentorship under her direct guidance, opportunities I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams. She was offering me a door into a life I had only ever seen from afar, a world reserved for the powerful, the educated, the chosen few. My heart raced uncontrollably, my hands clammy as the weight of it settled on me. Was I ready for such responsibility? I was just a man who worked in a factory, a man who struggled to pay rent, a man drowning in debt. How could I possibly step into this role she was offering? "You don't understand," I said hoarsely, my voice trembling. I'm not like you. I've never handled money like this, never managed anything more than my own survival. I don't belong in this world." Her eyes softened, but her voice carried an unshakable conviction. "Neither did I, once. I came from nothing, just like you. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I learned step by step, mistake by mistake. You will too, and I will guide you." Her confidence unsettled me and comforted me all at once. Why did she believe in me so much, when I had spent my entire life being overlooked? Why was she so certain that I could carry what she had built? The temptation clawed at me. Freedom from debts, a chance to escape the chains that had bound me for so long, a chance to give my sister the life she deserved, the possibility of not just survival, but a future filled with choices I had never dared to dream of. And yet, fear gripped me just as tightly. What if I failed? What if I drowned in a world too big, too ruthless for me? What if this wasn't a blessing, but a trap disguised as opportunity? I wrestled inside myself, torn between safety and destiny, between the comfort of the familiar and the terrifying promise of the unknown. She seemed to read the war in my eyes. She reached across the table, her hand steady and warm as it rested on mine. "Do not let fear steal your future," she said softly. "You gave me hope when you had nothing to give. Let me give you the chance to become who you are meant to be." Her words sank deep into me, breaking through the fog of doubt. For the first time, I imagined myself stepping into that world, learning, growing, leading. I imagined becoming more than just a man who struggled to survive. I imagined becoming a man who could change lives, just as she had. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. My chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths as I stared at the folder, the contracts, the promises of a future I had never believed possible. And then, with trembling fingers, I reached for the pen lying beside the papers. The room felt impossibly quiet as I lowered the pen to the page, my hand shaking with the enormity of what I was about to do. I signed the first document, the ink bleeding across the paper like a seal on my fate. In that moment, I didn't fully grasp what I had agreed to. All I knew was that with a single stroke of my hand, I had rewritten my future forever. My life transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was as if a single signature had unlocked doors that had been sealed to me all my life, pulling me from the narrow lanes of survival into the grand corridors of possibility. And as I stepped into that world, I realized I was no longer the same man who once counted coins just to buy a single meal. New clothes, new circles, and doors opening everywhere. The change began with the clothes. For years I had worn the same faded shirts, shoes with worn-out soles, trousers patched in more places than I cared to admit. But now, under her guidance, I was ushered into a world of fabric I had never touched before. Fine suits tailored precisely to my frame, crisp shirts that gleamed under the light, polished leather shoes that seemed too grand for my feet. The first time I stood before a mirror dressed in them, I hardly recognized the man staring back. He looked confident, powerful, as though he belonged in the places I had once only passed by in silence. But it wasn't only the clothes. Doors began to open. Doors I had never dared to knock on. I was introduced to people whose names carried weight in boardrooms and government halls. Men and women who shook my hand firmly, their eyes studying me with curiosity, trying to decide if I was worth their time. The very rooms I once thought belonged only to the powerful were now opening wide to welcome me inside. And yet, each time I entered, I felt a quiet disbelief echoing in my chest. How did I get here? Her mentorship, teaching me the language of wealth and influence. She never left me to face that world alone. At every step, she stood beside me, not just as a benefactor, but as a mentor. She began teaching me what she called the language of wealth. Money isn't enough, she would say. Wealth is about presence, influence, the way you sit at a table, the way you speak when all eyes are on you, the way you listen when silence is your greatest weapon. She showed me how to read people's expressions, how to sense their intentions before their words revealed them. She explained how deals were rarely made on paper alone, but in the subtle nods, the tones, the silences that carried more meaning than any contract. At first I stumbled often, my tongue tripping over unfamiliar terms, my hands fidgeting when all I needed to project was calm. But she corrected me gently, her voice patient. "Confidence is a muscle," she said once. "You build it the same way you build strength, repetition, endurance, and belief." My growth in confidence, decision-making, and vision. Slowly I began to change. My posture straightened. My voice steadied. I learned to weigh decisions not just by the fear of loss, but by the vision of what could be gained. She would challenge me constantly, presenting choices, asking what I would do, and then dissecting my reasoning until I could see beyond my own narrow perspective. In time, my instincts sharpened. I began to see opportunities where once I had seen only obstacles. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could belong in this new world. Each small success, a negotiation handled well, a decision made with clarity, built a layer of confidence I had never known before. Family's astonishment at my sudden rise. At home, the transformation was nothing short of shocking. My sister, who had grown used to counting every coin with me, now watched in astonishment as I returned wearing suits that looked like they belonged to someone else entirely. She touched the fabric of my jacket one evening, her eyes wide. "Is this really you?" she whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. Our small apartment, once filled with shadows of poverty, began to change. The cupboards were no longer empty. The table was no longer bare. For the first time, laughter returned to our home. Not forced, but genuine. My family looked at me with pride, yet I often caught their unspoken questions in their eyes. How had everything changed so quickly? Would it last? My guilt. Was this too much too soon? Their questions echoed the ones in my own heart. Each night, when I removed the fine clothes and sat alone in the quiet of my room, guilt would creep in. Was this truly mine to claim? Had I leapt too far, too fast from the man who once struggled to afford bread? I remembered too vividly the hunger in my stomach, the coins that slipped through my fingers, the exhaustion that had once been my only companion. Now, Surrounded by abundance, I sometimes felt like an imposter, as though I had stolen a role from someone else, as though the world might strip it away at any moment. The old lady's warning. Every gift comes with shadows. One evening, as if sensing the turmoil in my heart, she sat with me in silence before finally speaking. Her voice was soft, almost mournful. Every gift, she said, comes with shadows. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. Do not mistake fortune for freedom. The world will not only admire you for your rise, it will also resent you. Her words chilled me, a warning that success was not simply a blessing, but a burden. My first taste of success drew envy I wasn't prepared for. I brushed her words aside at first, convincing myself they were only the fears of someone who had lived too long in struggle. But soon, I began to see it. In the glances that lingered too long, in the smiles that carried no warmth, in the whispers that trailed behind me when I entered a room. My first taste of success did not only lift me higher, it painted a target on my back. And the envy I saw in their eyes was a shadow I had not been prepared to face. Riches don't just change your life. They change the people around you. I once believed that money would silence my struggles, erase debts, and turn every sorrow into joy. But instead, it revealed shadows I had never seen before, shadows hiding in the faces of friends, family, and strangers alike. Wealth, I learned, was not just a gift. It was a burden I had never been prepared to carry. Friends turned distant. Relatives turned greedy. That was the first wound wealth inflicted upon me. My old friends, the ones who had once shared laughter in cramped rooms and stale bread on hungry nights, suddenly seemed different. Their eyes no longer looked into mine but lingered on my clothes, my watch, my car. Their words felt forced, their smiles thin. Some stopped calling altogether, as though my rise had drawn an invisible line between us. Those who remained carried envy behind their laughter, and I could feel the shift. I was no longer one of them. Relatives, on the other hand, flooded my life with attention I had never known. Cousins who had ignored my struggles now arrived with wide smiles and stories of family loyalty. At first, I welcomed them with open arms, foolishly believing their warmth was real. But soon their words bent toward requests. A loan here, school fees there, a failing business that needed my help. Every visit ended with expectation. It wasn't me they wanted. It was what I carried in my hands. And with every request, I felt the chains of family duty tighten, choking the joy I should have felt in giving. The question burned me day and night. Who can I trust? And who should I fear? Each conversation left me suspicious. Each handshake weighed with hidden intent. I replayed words in my head, dissected glances, searched for the line between loyalty and greed. The paranoia hollowed me out. Poverty had been painful, but it had been simple. Wealth was a labyrinth of masks, and every path seemed to lead to betrayal. In my desperation to prove myself worthy of this new life, I made mistakes. I chased quick wins, dazzled by promises of instant growth. I threw money into ventures I barely understood, convinced that boldness meant speed. And for a while, it felt intoxicating. Numbers climbed, partners praised me, and I believed I was unstoppable. But soon the shimmer turned to dust. Deals collapsed, partners vanished. Money slipped away like water through my fingers. Those failures cut deeper than hunger ever had. When I was poor, losing meant going without food for a day. Now losing meant shame, disappointment, and the terrifying sense that I was squandering not only my chance, but the faith she had placed in me. My chest ached with guilt. I had thought wealth would give me freedom. Instead, it bound me with heavier chains. Through all of this, she remained by my side. She never turned away, even when I staggered under the weight of my failures. Sitting across from me, her voice calm but firm, she would say, "Slow down. You are sprinting up a mountain, and if you fall, The ground will break you harder than hunger ever did. Grow steady, grow strong, and let patience be your greatest weapon. Her words steadied me, but my impatience often betrayed me. I wanted so badly to prove myself, to prove that I belonged, to prove that her trust was not misplaced. And in that hunger, I stumbled again and again. Still, she never abandoned me. Every scar is a lesson, she told me once, placing her hand over mine. Do not hide them. Wear them as armor. Even with her wisdom, loneliness crept into me like a shadow. I stood in grand halls, surrounded by laughter and music, but I had never felt more alone. Everyone wanted something, a share of my wealth, a piece of my time, a step on my ladder. But no one wanted me. Not the boy who had once gone hungry, not the man still searching for meaning. In poverty, I had at least known who was real. In wealth, I was drowning in masks. It was then I began to see what money truly was, a magnifying glass. It didn't change people, it revealed them. For the kind-hearted, it became a tool of generosity. For the greedy, it became fuel for an endless hunger. And within myself, I saw both reflections. I wanted to help, to lift others, to repay the kindness that had once saved me. But I also felt pride rising in my chest, the thrill of power, the whisper that perhaps I was untouchable now. Wealth was a mirror, and the reflection staring back frightened me. And then it came, my first major betrayal. It didn't come from a rival in business or a stranger in the shadows. It came from someone close, someone I had welcomed back into my life, someone whose smile I had trusted. The evidence hit me like a blade. It wasn't just money they had taken. It was trust. It was faith. It was the fragile hope that some bonds were stronger than greed. To know they had plotted behind my back, to realize that every warm word, every smile had been a mask, shattered something inside me. I sat in silence, the proof trembling in my hands, the air heavy with disbelief. I had thought wealth was a crown, a shield, a blessing. But in that moment, I understood the truth. Wealth was also a burden, heavier than hunger, sharper than betrayal, lonelier than despair. As I stared at the betrayal laid bare before me, my chest hollow and my hands shaking, the room around me felt colder than I had ever known. Wealth had not protected me. It had painted a target on my back. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The burden of riches had just revealed its darkest price. The knife of betrayal always cuts deeper when it comes from someone close. I had feared enemies in the outside world, but I never imagined that the sharpest wound would come from the very hands I once clasped in trust. The day I uncovered the truth, it felt as though the ground beneath me crumbled, leaving me grasping for air in a world I thought I was beginning to understand. A trusted friend schemed against me. That truth still echoes in my chest like a bell that refuses to stop ringing. He was not just a friend. He had been a brother in spirit, someone who had shared my poverty, someone who had known the taste of hunger beside me. I had welcomed him back into my new life with open arms, believing that our bond was stronger than money, stronger than ambition. But while I looked at him with the eyes of loyalty, he looked at me with the eyes of envy. He smiled in my presence, spoke words of encouragement, clapped me on the back as though he was proud of me. But behind my back, he planted seeds of deceit. He whispered into the ears of others, making promises in my name, forging deals that bore my signature without my knowledge. When I finally uncovered his betrayal, it was not just ink on paper that condemned him. It was the weight of every lie he had told while sitting at my table, eating my bread, calling me brother. Financial loss and emotional devastation followed. Money drained from my accounts, funneled into ventures that never existed, disappearing into pockets I could no longer trace. The financial hit was staggering, a blow that shook the very foundation of what I had been building. But the deeper wound was not measured in numbers. It was the collapse of trust, the breaking of something invisible but vital, faith in another human being. I would sit at night staring at the documents, my hands trembling, my throat burning with unshed anger and grief. The wealth I lost could be rebuilt, yes, but the bond we had shared? That was shattered beyond repair. I had opened the door of my life to him, only to discover he had walked in with a knife hidden behind his smile. The old lady's disappointment, but also her encouragement, became my lifeline. When I confessed the betrayal to her, I braced myself for her anger, for harsh words, for judgment. Instead, she sat silently, her face unreadable, until she finally spoke. "I warned you," she said softly, her voice carrying neither rage nor condemnation, but a weary sadness. "Wealth does not only attract opportunity, it attracts hunger, and hunger is never satisfied." Her disappointment cut deep, but then she reached across the table, her hand resting firmly on mine. "You are not the first to be betrayed," she continued, her eyes steady, "and you will not be the last. But if betrayal breaks you, then it wins. If you rise from it, wiser, stronger, more careful, then it becomes a teacher." Her words lifted me from the ashes of despair. She did not excuse my mistake, but she gave me something far more important, the strength to stand again. Lessons on resilience, trust, and wisdom began to carve themselves into my heart. I learned that trust is not a gift to be handed out freely. It is a treasure to be guarded, earned, and tested over time. I learned that resilience is not about never falling, but about refusing to remain on the ground when the world pushes you down. And I learned that wisdom is not found in books or speeches, but in scars, in wounds that heal crooked, but make you stronger for the next blow. I began to move differently, to watch differently, to listen with more than my ears. I learned to measure people not by their words, but by the weight of their actions over time. Betrayal had cut me open, but from the wound, a sharper vision was born. My vow to never repeat the same mistake burned like fire inside me. I stood before the mirror one night, staring into my own eyes, speaking aloud, as if sealing a pact with myself. "Never again," I whispered, my voice raw. "Never again will I give my trust blindly. Never again will I mistake a smile for loyalty. Never again will I let someone close enough to wound me, without proving they deserve to stand beside me." It was not a vow of bitterness. It was a vow of survival. The realization that destiny tests those it blesses came slowly but firmly. Perhaps this was not punishment. Perhaps it was preparation. Destiny, I began to believe, does not hand out blessings without weighing the heart that carries them. To be trusted with wealth, with power, with opportunity, one must first be tested by loss, by betrayal, by the breaking of illusions. And as much as it hurt, I knew the truth. This betrayal was my test. The old lady had seen it long before I had. Her fortune had not only been a gift, it had been a crucible, burning away my naivety, forging me into someone stronger, sharper, more prepared for the battles ahead. One evening, after another long discussion about the scars betrayal had left on me, she sat back in her chair, her eyes clouded with something I hadn't seen before. Weariness. Her voice, usually so steady, wavered as she whispered, "My time is running out, and so is yours." The words froze me, chilling me deeper than betrayal ever had. For the first time, I realized the clock was ticking not only on her life, but on the destiny she had tied to mine. The strongest people prepare for the day they leave. I had watched her guide me through storms, through failures, through triumphs, always steady, always unshaken. Yet now, for the first time, I saw her strength wrapped in frailty, her hands trembling, her breath shorter, her voice softer. She was fading, and though she never said it directly at first, I could feel destiny pressing its hand on both our shoulders. Her health weakened, yet her wisdom grew sharper. It began with small changes I tried to ignore. She walked slower, her steps careful where they had once been firm. Conversations tired her more quickly, though her mind remained as keen as ever. When she spoke, her words carried a new urgency, as if she knew she was running out of time and had to press her wisdom into me before it was too late. I would visit her often, sometimes finding her resting in silence, staring out of the window with eyes that seemed to travel far beyond the present. Yet the moment I sat down, she would turn to me with a clarity that cut straight into my soul. "Do not waste the mistakes you've made," she would whisper. "Every failure is a teacher, and every scar is a shield. Remember that when I am gone," she confessed she didn't have long to live. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in gold, she looked at me with a seriousness that silenced my restless thoughts. "My body is failing me," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "I have fought hard, but time wins every battle. I do not have long, and I will not pretend otherwise." Her words shattered the illusion I had clung to, the hope that she would always be there, guiding me, correcting me, lifting me when I fell. I tried to protest, to insist that she was stronger than she knew, but she silenced me with a single look. It wasn't despair in her eyes, it was acceptance. Her greatest wish, that I carry forward her mission of kindness. She leaned forward, her frail hands gripping mine with surprising strength. "Money was never the gift I wanted to give you," she said firmly. "It was only a tool, a door to open. The real gift was the chance to continue what saved me. Kindness. You must carry it forward, not as charity, not as pity, but as purpose. Find those the world overlooks and remind them they are not forgotten. That is what I ask of you. That is my wish." Her words pierced me deeper than any lesson on wealth ever had. In that moment, I realized she was not handing me an empire. She was handing me a legacy. The emotional bond we shared, she became family. Somewhere along the path from stranger to mentor, she had become something more. She was not just the old lady I had once fed outside a cafe. She was not just the millionaire who had transformed my life. She was family, the grandmother I never had, the guardian I never expected, the voice I knew I would carry long after she was gone. We shared stories late into the night. She told me of her own losses, of the kindness that once saved her life, of the betrayals that hardened her resolve. And I shared mine, my childhood, my fears, my dreams. Together we stitched a bond, not of blood, but of something far stronger: trust, gratitude, and love. My tears at the thought of losing her came freely, no matter how hard I tried to stop them. I had spent years fighting poverty, hiding my emotions behind a mask of endurance. But now, sitting beside her, hearing her speak of leaving, I broke. "I can't do this without you," I whispered, my voice trembling, my chest heavy with grief. She reached out, her frail fingers brushing the tears from my face. "Yes, you can," she said softly. "That is why I chose you. Because even in your hunger, you gave. Even in your pain, you saw someone else's suffering. That is the strength no one can take from you. That is why you will carry this further than I ever could." Her words comforted me, but they did not erase the ache of knowing I was losing her. Her smile. It was never about money, but what you'll do with it. Even as her strength faded, her smile remained. Soft, knowing, unshaken. One night, as we sat together in the quiet, she looked at me with eyes that glimmered despite the weariness in her body. "You still think this story was about wealth," she said almost teasingly. "But it was never about the money. Money is paper, numbers, dust. What matters is what you'll do with it. That will decide whether you honor me or waste me." Her words carved themselves into me like stone. For the first time, I saw the fortune not as an inheritance, but as a responsibility. It wasn't about my rise. It was about what I could build for others. The day she, passed me her will, her hands trembling as she slid the envelope across the table. I expected it to contain numbers, properties, and documents of wealth. But when I broke the seal and read the first lines, my breath caught in my throat. Her will contained a secret no one had known, a revelation that threatened to change everything I thought I understood about her, about myself, and about the destiny she had tied to me. And in that moment, I realized her story, and mine, was far from over. When she left, she didn't just give me wealth, she gave me purpose. Her absence was like a silence too heavy to bear, a void where her steady voice used to echo. The world looked the same, but I felt it had shifted forever. I realized she hadn't just entrusted me with her fortune. She had entrusted me with her unfinished life. Her will entrusted me with charities, businesses, and dreams she left unfinished. The day I opened her will, my fingers shook as though I was touching fire. The envelope wasn't just paper. It was a vessel of her spirit. Inside, I expected cold lists of assets, legal jargon, and numbers, but what I found instead was something far more sacred. It began with names of schools she had built, shelters she had supported, children she had fed. Detailed instructions filled the pages, how much to allocate, which projects to expand, which communities still waited for her help. She wrote as though she was still alive, her pen guiding me like her voice had once done. Then came the businesses. They weren't the glittering empires of luxury I had imagined. They were quiet, purposeful ventures, small factories that provided jobs for widows, farms that supported entire villages, workshops where the poor could learn trades. Each line carried her philosophy. Wealth must serve, not suffocate. It was in those words that I realized her will wasn't about money. It was about continuity. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a command. She hadn't left me wealth to enjoy. She had left me dreams to finish, my journey from poverty to stewardship of her legacy. Sometimes I still couldn't believe it. Just a few years ago, I had been a boy with empty pockets, walking streets with hollow eyes, clutching coins that barely bought a piece of bread. I remembered the shame of being invisible, of sitting in silence while others ordered food, of praying that no one would notice my hunger. And now, I was sitting in offices that overlooked skylines, meeting leaders who shook my hand with respect. I was being called sir, when once I was overlooked as a beggar of opportunity. But more than the titles, what stunned me was the responsibility. I was no longer living only for myself. I had become a steward of her life's work. Every decision I made wasn't just about my future. It was about hers, too. She had taken the boy who gave her a meal and turned him into the man who now fed thousands. Poverty had been my prison, but her legacy had become my purpose. The weight of responsibility, but also the beauty of giving back. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, crushed under the enormity of what she had placed on my shoulders. It was not easy. Board meetings stretched into endless hours, with men twice my age questioning my every choice. Charities demanded more funds than I could always provide. Families lined up outside our shelters, their faces etched with the same desperation I had once carried. The weight was unbearable at times. I feared failing her, feared letting her legacy crumble in my inexperienced hands. But in those moments of despair, I returned to the places she had built. One day, I visited a school that bore her name. Children ran toward me, their laughter bright as sunlight, their little hands tugging at my coat. "Thank you," one boy whispered, clutching a worn notebook as though it was treasure. Tears blurred my vision as I knelt down, touching his shoulder. That day, I realized something powerful. The weight of responsibility was heavy, yes, but the beauty of giving back was heavier still, not in burden, but in meaning. I finally understood what she meant when she said, "Every gift comes with shadows, but shadows cannot dim a light that chooses to shine." How I became the person I once dreamed of, because of her. When I was poor, I used to dream of someone who would notice me, someone who would pull me out of the pit I was drowning in. I dreamt of a savior, a figure who would lift me to a place where I could breathe freely. Now, because of her, I had become that very figure, not for myself, but for others. I was no longer the boy waiting for help. I was the man offering it. I was no longer invisible. I was visible in the eyes of every child who smiled at me, every mother who blessed me, every worker whose dignity was restored through the opportunities we created. It humbled me deeply. To realize that I had become what I once longed for was almost too much to carry. But it was also a reminder that her faith in me had not been misplaced. Reflection. Destiny disguises itself in ordinary moments. Whenever I thought of that day outside the cafe, it stunned me how ordinary it had felt. She was just an old woman, hungry and frail. I was just a poor man, clutching my last coins. There had been no lightning in the sky, no sign from the heavens, just a choice, to feed her instead of myself. That moment, disguised in simplicity, had become the axis of my entire existence. It made me wonder, how many moments pass us by daily, unnoticed, while destiny waits quietly inside them? We think destiny announces itself with grandeur, but often it hides in the smallest decisions, the ones we don't realize are life-changing until years later. Her life and mine had crossed in an ordinary moment, but in truth, it was the most extraordinary twist of fate I could ever imagine. My final thought. That meal wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The day I gave her that meal, I thought I was simply helping a stranger survive a little longer. But what I didn't know was that I was feeding my own destiny. That moment wasn't closure. It was genesis. It wasn't charity. It was covenant. That simple act was the seed that grew into everything I am today. If I had walked away, if I had chosen to keep my food, none of this would have happened. I might still be lost, still starving, still invisible. But because I gave, because she chose to return, a story was written that bound us together forever. That meal was never about hunger. It was about purpose. Even now, as I stand in the shadow of her legacy, I am haunted by a question that refuses to leave me. Was it fate that I chose to help her, or was it fate that she chose to find me? Perhaps both. Perhaps destiny works in circles, weaving kindness back to the giver. And if that is true, then I know my story, like hers, has not ended. It has only just begun. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives can be changed through small acts of kindness. Don't just watch. Become part of this journey by subscribing, sharing, and leaving your thoughts below. Every comment is another voice in our family. Every share is another spark of kindness spread to the world. Stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that changes your destiny.